Hello and welcome to this game review. You talked about studying openings, and you're right that memorizing lines is not really useful, especially at your level. You will never need the lines that you're learning, but understanding the openings you play is a lot more important. And especially with the Sicilian, there's a lot of experts, and specifically with the classical Sicilian, I would suggest the Grandmaster Kozul Zhidenko, who has even a classical variation named after himself, who has been playing this for more or less 40-50 years. So he is a big expert in the Rouser's Sicilian, or just the classical Sicilian, however you like to call it. So analyzing his games, I think he even has a book on the subject with a lot of annotated master games as well. But generally, we have to understand the Sicilian as a whole to play it. So here, it doesn't really matter which move black plays. Whenever white plays d4 and these pawns are exchanged, something very important happens. Now, black has two pawns in the center, while white has kind of a lead in development. Well, if he continues actively. And also, black has the simple plan of playing a6, b5, b4. His rook has a good place on c8, pinning this knight on c3 to the pawn on c2 quite often. So black is positionally better. So statically, we have to understand that if nothing happens, black will be better due to his long-term advantages of the center and the open file, or half-open file, as well as the easy minority attack. Which means if white doesn't play actively, and if he does not use his lead in space and development, he will end up worse. And this is usually how weak players lose with white against the Sicilian. They play very passively, non-concretely, and they allow black to develop quite easily, and then black's game is quite simple. So this is more or less what happened in this position. So white played f3, which is possible, but bishop g5 is more or less the only critical line, with queen d2, castling queenside, and either f3, g4, or f4, and etc. White must play actively, otherwise he is risking to get a bad position in the long run. So let's see what happened. f3, a6. So in the opening principles, we shouldn't really move pawns without any real reason. The opening is for taking the center, developing the pieces, and castling the king as soon as possible. So here e5 is the most logical, knight b3, bishop e7, and we get this kind of normal position with bishop e6, castles, and if white doesn't get good control over d5, or if he doesn't start attacking, white will end up worse. Okay, a6, a3, and this is way too slow, of course, and this is again with theory. It doesn't really matter if you know theory or not, your opponents will play moves like a3, and this is way too slow. White should develop as quickly as possible, maybe play g4 at some point, castle queenside, and try to attack. And after a3, e6, bishop e3, black exchanges, which is not very ideal, as this allows white to develop for free, and now castle queenside. Black should probably just develop the bishop, castle kingside, and go from there. But okay, bishop e7, bishop c4. So white wants to castle. White wants to castle kingside, which is already a mistake, because as mentioned, black has the two pawns in the center. He has the open file for his rook. He has the minority attack. So if white doesn't attack, if he does not use his space advantage, then he will just be worse. So already white must castle queenside, and it's not even a matter of taste. White kind of has to do something active. Then g4, g5, white has quite a comfortable version of such positions. Also, this bishop on a2, it is completely useless unless white does something to black's king, and only then will this bishop become a piece, because currently it's just looking at the pawn on e6. So castles, castles and d5, and after this, white doesn't even have his space advantage, and already black is a lot more comfortable. This move f3 hasn't helped white. He would like to have this pawn back on f2, and now it only weakens the king. This knight can never move, more or less because of the pawn on c2, This bishop is horribly placed because it's looking at e6, and it will never take on e6 unless white does something like f4, f5, but that is quite unlikely with the king on g1. So now g3 is played, and this is apparently even a blunder, somewhat tactically. It seems that after h6, the queen is short of squares, queen h4 is the only square, bishop c5 comes with tempo, piece exchanges also favor black, as in the endgame, this horrible bishop will be even more pronounced, and for example after king g2, rook a d8, it seems that white hasn't done anything very special, but the position is evaluated at -4. So because white's king is weak, his pieces are horrible, and he has no attack going. But okay, rook a8 is fine. Rook ac1, again passive. H6, queen h4, bishop c5, queen b6. And I guess you could already look for some kind of tactics by taking here queen b6. Now this rook is hanging, for example, rook e1. Now this pawn is hanging, and if this pawn is gone, then this king is horribly weak, and also black now has a 4-on-2 majority, which means all endgames will be completely winning. Not to mention, black will probably just checkmate on the long diagonal, as this bishop is nowhere in sight to help. Otherwise, if king f2, I mean, we don't really have to do anything special. a5, b4, the typical plan of the Sicilian trying to get the pawn on c2. White's position is hopeless. Okay, queen b6 is a bit slow. Knight d1. Okay, takes rook c2. So now black has won a pawn, and he also is keeping all the positional advantages. e5. And the white decides to just lose a piece. Well, even more than a piece. Here, even this is, of course, good enough, as black is up a piece. White should have, of course, played queen f5, after which the game kind of goes on. It is, of course, extremely unpleasant for white, as he is a pawn down, his king is very weak, and black's moves are very easy. But still, the game would kind of go on. But after this, the game is just over, as black has a lot of material. So, quite well played by black. Again, in the Sicilian, black doesn't really have to do anything special. Black just has to develop his pieces, try not to get checkmated, and usually, especially weak opponents, they will be too shy to attack, and they will play with kingside castles. Their moves will not really have any purpose, and they will just get a bad position because of doing nothing. And after this, black is just completely developed. White's pieces are not coordinated to do anything, so the position got winning automatically, so to say.